And in addition to pathways to reach 1.5 degrees, a large focus of the IPCC report is describing the consequences of a 1.5 degree warmer world compared to even warmer worlds. And to give us a presentation of this, we have Erik Kjellström. And Erik was until recently head of SMHI's climate modeling unit, the Rossby Center. Recently, though, you have been appointed as professor in climatology at SMHI, which is the first time that SMHI is appointing such a professor. Furthermore, he is adjunct professor at the Department of Meteorology at the Stockholm University. So, Erik, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Petter. I will talk a bit about impacts, as said. So it's impacts at 1.5 degree. I will also touch upon 2 degrees and also higher warming levels to some extent. This is just to show how the report looks like. It's a very nice graph. This is the front page of it, and it's a piece of artwork made based on one of the figures in the report, as I've understood it. Impacts are described in chapter 3 of this report. It has some 3 lead authors, and there are some 20 authors altogether, and a large number of contributing authors as well to this chapter. A few hundred pages, so it's a really thick chapter, really describing both climate change and also impacts of climate change. So there is no way I can tell you everything about that chapter in a few minutes. I will give you some few headlines, and then I can recommend the further reading of the chapter itself. Just to start off again with 1.5 degree, what that really is and where we are today. So Mark already mentioned it. We are close to 1 degree today in 2017 if we look at the human-induced warming. This is stated in this report. We can also look at the last few decades here and see that in the last 20-year period here, as you can see, 1991 to 2010, there was about half a degree warming if you compare to a previous period, 1960 to 80 roughly. So we have seen this kind of 0.5 degree warming in the recent few decades. So that can be kind of a measure that we can have when we look into the future as well to compare with. The current warming is about 0.2 degrees per decade, so this indicates that we will reach this 1.5 degree in like 25 years or so from now. The report is quite clear also that there is not only one scenario, there is not only one 1.5 degree world. So the assessment is based on very many different global and climate model projections. Some of them are transient, where we have a very strong trend and increasing temperatures globally. Others are stabilized climate scenarios at the end of the century. And some are also long-term, very long-term projections. So, and these will be very different when you look at, for instance, extremes and things like that. So there is not just one picture here. It's a mixture of very different results. Having said that, they also state in this report that, of course, there is a lot of observed impacts already now. We know that climate has changed a lot, and as they state here, this citation here is that human-induced warming has already caused multiple observed changes in the climate system, which then have large impacts both on organisms, ecosystems, as well as on human beings, of course. So this is a statement saying something about where we are today. Climate change in the report is, there is a lot of results, of course, and descriptions of that, but these are 2 kind of key messages, I think, that you can lift out from this one. The first one saying that for the future, there are substantial differences in temperature and also extreme events. If you look at the 1.5 degree time window, when that is reached, the climate at that point will be substantially different from what we see today. So this is one message. The second message is that there are also, of course, very strong changes between 1.5 and 2. This may sound a bit evident, of course, but this is what it really says also. I mean, there are clear differences between these different warming levels, and that is something that has a large, of course, impact on all effects and impacts of climate change. So they are clearly different at these different warming levels. Temperature extremes is one thing that is stressed over and over again. So there are large differences already in the observed climate, but also in the future as well. And this comes out of this report from time to time as well. Speaking about impacts and risks or reasons for concern, as they use in this report, they have lifted out a number of different areas here where they have kind of tried to look at these risks, how large they are, and at different warming levels. And here you can see starting from 0 degree to 1 degree, where we are today, the grayish area here, and then further into 1.5 and 2 degrees, these risks. And the redder the colors get in these bars, the worse are the risks, and the larger are the impacts as well. And starting out from the left, we have like warm water corals, which is one thing that has been really pointed out in this report. And it's a complete disaster what we are seeing already today. There is a lot of bleaching of these corals, and in the future we will see complete, more or less dieback of all of these, especially at the 2 degrees scenario that is pointed out here. So there are some differences between 1.5 and 2, of course. And you can see the colors all the time get more and more deep when you get further to the top. So it really means that there is a large impact of trying to keep the temperatures low. They also point to the Arctic region. Arctic ecosystems is one thing that is pointed out, and we are close to the Arctic. The Nordic countries are partly in the Arctic region, so this is an area where we have large changes and impacts as well. Some short statements about differences between 1.5 and 2 degrees. They are partly related to ecosystems, but also partly related to societies. And it's very clear from this report that there are differences in how people and the societies are impacted of different changes. As they state, there are less extreme weather events where people live at 1.5 compared to 2 degrees. There is a large number of people, fewer, that will be exposed to high sea level at 1.5 degree to 2 degrees. They talk about 10 million people. And as you can see, there is a long list here of these different statements that really clearly, very clearly shows that the societies and people are really going to be much more affected at 2 degrees compared to 1 degree. So I will finish off just by saying just a very few things about the Nordic region. These are not statements directly from the report, but it's just some reflections on our climate and where we see really strong changes in the Nordic region. And I think this is very much related, of course, to the content of the report as well. The changes in the Arctic region are very large already now, and we see them in the scenarios. And this also, of course, impacts the Nordic countries very directly. I think the changes in the wintertime temperatures is something which is very, very strong and significant, that really sticks out when we look or stands out when we look at our scenarios and also in the observations. In this Nordic region, we see, of course, increasing precipitation. In summer times, it's partly offset by strong evaporation, like this summer. We had a very dry summer, so there is also risk, of course, of drought seasons and periods even in our region as well. Both this report and all other studies as well, they show clearly changes in extremes in the future. There will be much less warm extremes, more heavy precipitation extremes. There will be much less cold extremes. So there is one type of weather extremes that will be changed in the other direction, not so severe in the future. And again, I just point back again to this fact that we have already seen a very pronounced climate change signal, and you can think about this kind of 0.5 degree where that would take us. If you look back a few decades, you can see that there are some parallels to what have been happening over the last few decades. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, Erik. As many of you know, and as Marco told us earlier, in Paris, countries got together to agree on a new climate target. The old one used to be to limit global warming to 2 degrees, but in Paris they decided to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees and aim at 1.5. And as Matthias' presentation showed, reaching 2 degrees will be tough. Reaching 1.5 degree will be a lot tougher even. So considering this challenge and what you've seen from the report, you as a climate scientist, would you say it's worth it, going for 1.5 degrees instead of 2?
I definitely think so. If you look at the impacts, if you had looked at the slide where I have all of these bullets affecting people all over the world, especially in poor countries, I would say, where the resilience also is lower and it's more difficult tackle these changes. I think definitely, and more so also for the natural ecosystems of the world. I think there is that is something we have to really be the voice of these ecosystems as well as climate scientists. I think in this context.
Okay, thank you again, Erik.